opinion, the major threat is the systemic, institutional and historic issues. It is, in my view, another a reality that the white supremacist, male-dominated patriarchy, which would have originated 4 centuries ago when Europe dominated the world, and you had colonialism, slavery, empire, etc., is very much deeply ingrained. And the legacy, so to speak, of that, where in that patriarchy and colonialism and empire building, Black and colored women, first people, indigenous people, were not considered human beings. And the whole construct, social and otherwise, became endemic. And as you look at the world of sport, especially in terms of the sport movement, where it is European dominated, it still reflects that. And that is an element of history and the historical antecedents that people try to avoid. It's a very uncomfortable conversation, but it is a needed conversation. But trying to avoid it, to defend it, to apply microaggressions towards it in terms of bullying and trying to force appropriateness, which is really an appropriateness based on this construct, remains, to my mind, the significant challenge that efforts over the years and even in this time at genuine equality, racial equality, and the removal of discriminatory practices, whether it be on the basis of gender, race, ethnicity, disability, remains deeply institutionalized, systemic, and profound. Well, the reality is that in the modern construct, I mean, it was always so, but in particular in the modern construct, whether it is because of social media, etc., the athletes, the modern generation of athletes, reflect their peers, the modern generation of youth and young people, and they aren't so accepting of the status quo, the patriarchy status quo, and they are willing to push the envelope and agitate even to having the uncomfortable conversation. And in that regard, the athletes form, in my view, an important element of this from the fact that they are role models and their youth, the youth and young people across the globe look up to the athletes, and the athletes of today have the platform that they can stand up and advocate and put pressure on the system so that the role of the athletes and giving the athletes the environment and opportunity within a framework to advocate for these significant issues. As I was saying, there be gender, be it race, be it ethnicity, disability, LGBTQ, the barriers and the obstacles that have institutionalized, systemized, discriminatory practices, and some of which I put forward, unconscious. And even the people who say that they are advocates for social and racial justice and anti-discrimination themselves at times must look in the mirror and appreciate their unconscious bias, because what they tend to do is try to edit and try to make in their word, by their judgment, appropriate the statements and the advocacy of the athletes, youth, and young people, and those who advocate for non-discrimination and a zero tolerance for non-discrimination in the context of creating an environment and safe zone that allows people to feel listened to and free to be who they are. The playing field is not level for Black and colored and women, First people, Indigenous people, disabled people. They are required to be exceptional to get a space. And again, that's something people don't want to acknowledge. They try to justify. But if it is that there are some people that have to be exceptional, the playing field is not level. There are some people who have privilege and white privilege. And, as I said, the athletes of today, I commend their willingness to not be seen just to satisfy the status quo and by silence's compliance and by staying silent, to be seen and not heard. There are people who say that the athletes should not bring politics into it and should focus only on their performance. That in and of itself is a discriminatory microaggression. Well, I think that, SIGA is doing as best as it can. I commend SIGA for actually having a GRID committee, standing committee. As I was saying in Miami at the Soccer Rex, Emmanuel, the CEO, and I would have had a conversation and from the perspective of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committee, and myself personally, we have been incredibly supportive of Emmanuel's vision and the vision of SIGA. But I recall the genesis of the GRID committee was that I was telling Emmanuel that I felt that I've always had his back and always supporters of SIGA, but on the issue in particular of racial equality, at times I felt like I was a voice crying in the wilderness, and I didn't have the support of Emmanuel and GRID. SIGA. And Emmanuel, to his credit, was said, no, that's not so. And, as I said, we had a conversation, and that really was the genesis of gender, race, inclusion, and diversity. So FIGA is well-intentioned, and it's comprised of passionate people who are genuinely committed and sincere in their commitment. But there is a reality. And even though that SIGA has the universal standards, the devil is in the detail. The implementation of it, the monitoring and evaluation, and the challenge that SIGA faces, notwithstanding its growing partners, is that many of the, for want of a better definition, descriptive of the status quo and the establishment of global sport in particular, still have a pushback and a resistance towards embracing the SIGA and the SIGA Universal Standards. And I believe that the worthy efforts and the commendable efforts of SIGA, its universal standards across the board, and the grid and the universal standards will face a hurdle. And that's a hurdle and an effort we have to collectively and individually be very committed and unwavering and indomitable in advocating and pushing for. Organizations such as the International Olympic Committee, the international federations in Europe, which make up the International Olympic Committee, the Commonwealth Games Federation, and when you come across to the Americas, the NOCs in America, the continental groups, whether it is Pan Am Sports, Central Caribbean Sports, you look at the American market, you know, the MLSs, the NFLs, the NBA, Major League Basketball, the NBAs, and all the different entities. You know, we have to, as a SIGA, get them on board. And that is why I was very encouraged by the fact that for the first time we had a grid forum at SoccerX. Although, if I have to be very honest, I was disappointed that SoccerX just seemed to be, you know, as I said, while we got the opportunity and we had a presence and it was successful, I wasn't happy with the turnout. You know, I haven't been there actually. I think that the grid forum, because of the importance of it, deserved and had earned the right to be in the main hall, the studio, as they call it. And again, to me, that is not a criticism. It is a statement of fact that, in my view, affirms the position that there is the reluctance still of establishment on the status quo to have the uncomfortable conversations that need to be had on the issue of discrimination and injustices and inequalities on the basis of gender and race, disability, etc.
Is that the solution?
Of course, I believe that to have inequalities and injustices, be there social injustices, racial injustices, gender injustice, injustice on the basis of LGBTQ, disability, ableism, is not, there is no place for that in the modern world. But that having been said, we have to be realistic. It doesn't make any sense being idealistic and naive about it. The reality is that those who benefit from a system won't want to change it. And the fact is that there are many institutions, organizations, and individuals historically that have benefited from the white supremacist, male-dominated patriarchy. And those who are dedicated, committed, unwavering in their passion and commitment and dedication, such as SIGA, such as the members of the GRID Standing Committee, we must face up to that reality that it's not just about sport, it's about business, it's about technology, it's about, you look at every industry. The surveys have been there, the facts have been there, the research has shown that gender, on the basis of gender, women, they are underrepresented at the decision making and head table. And on the basis of racial diversity, Black, colored, Latino, Asians, First People, Indigenous people, etc. So that many, in the context of sport, I'm saying many global sporting organizations, many business organizations, many technology organizations, they don't reflect the world as it is now. They don't reflect their constituents. They don't reflect their client base. They don't reflect their customer base. But still, it is a conversation that makes people uncomfortable. SIGA and the GRID Committee must be unrelenting and fearless. And we must also, as a group in SIGA, be above reproach. Because there are times when SIGA itself, no matter how hard we try, if you look at, even when we do workshops from seminars, there are people I know have said to me that SIGA is talking the talk, but not necessarily always walking the talk, because they're talking about diversity, they're talking about inclusion, and many times I look at their panels, etc., may not necessarily reflect the talk that we are talking. And that is a comment and a criticism and an observation that I face unflinchingly, because we can't be complacent. We can't believe that SIGA itself is holier than thou. We have to constantly be holding ourselves to the standard that we have set and articulated in terms of our universal standards. There are people, in other words, our partners and sponsors, whatever, we have to be above reproach in that regard, because the eyes are on SIGA and people are watching us. There is this saying that what you say speaks so loud, what you do, speaks so loud, I cannot hear what you say. I would tell them, listen, you have to check your unconscious bias. Let us appreciate and recognize that you are what you are. You are your history, or you were socialized. But once you are operating in a global environment, you have to be the change that you want to see. There is no room for discrimination, social and racial and gender injustices and inequalities. Be the change that you want to see. Be the change that you articulate. Be the change that you talk about.